This is episode 10 of Discovering Classical Music, Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony, the Pathetique. This was one of my favourite symphonies early on when I was just discovering classical music. It just sat there as an absolute champion of form and expression and use of the orchestra. Of course, we should know that the word pathetique or pathetic is referring to the sheer pathos of the symphony and not the modern colloquial understanding of the word pathetic. I love this piece because there's such a great variety of music packed together in an incredibly effective scheme. After the thrill ride of the third movement, the slow finale catches you off guard with its simplicity of despair. The whole piece from start to finish is just first class, and it has some of his greatest tunes, the second subject from the first movement, for example. But also it has stunning developments of his themes. The music just has this terse, dramatic power, and it also shows his mastery of orchestration. Before looking closer at the music, we might talk first about some history and biography, though honestly, the music doesn't really need it. It's strong enough that even with no biography, we can still feel the full musical power of this utter masterpiece. Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony was his swan song, his final piece of music. It premiered in 1893 on the 28th of October. Within less than a week of conducting the premiere, Tchaikovsky became very ill. By November the 6th, he was dead. It seems that Tchaikovsky probably died of cholera after drinking dirty water, though an alternative theory which emerged more recently suggests that Tchaikovsky may have committed suicide by poison on order of the state in order to cover up his homosexual affair with the Duke's nephew. This was a popular theory for quite a while, but with very little evidence to back it up. But it seems more likely that Tchaikovsky died of sickness. The piece was used recently and tastefully in Rupert Everett's biopic, The Happy Prince, documenting the end of Oscar Wilde's life. Like Tchaikovsky, Wilde too was married to publicly cover up his homosexuality. Wilde was a homosexual artist in an age and place where homosexuality was publicly unacceptable, and Wilde too died in middle age of sickness. In any case, Tchaikovsky's abrupt death days after this piece premiered has given the symphony a grand status as his final word, and this final word is made all the more striking by its pathos, consolations, and ultimately hopeless despair. I don't know that I need to say any more about this. The music really does speak for itself, and we really don't need to prescribe any kind of story onto it. So let's have a closer look at this symphony. But first, I wanted to mention a great music app that I've been using recently. It's called Encoder. That's Nkoda. It's an app which gives you immediate access to a huge bank of sheet music, tens of thousands of titles from publishers like Boosey and Hawkes, Bärenreiter, Novello, Chester, and others. You can find a wealth of older music from Bach to Tchaikovsky and beyond, but it also gives you access to some of the newest works in classical music. Hans Abrahamsson, John Adams, Sarajevo, Ludovico Einaudi. Their scores are on this app too, able to be accessed immediately. So it gives you access to such a rich and diverse library of sheet music right on your iPad, tablet, or computer. It's a subscription app, and they're offering free trials, so you should definitely check it out. You can find it at www.nkoda.com. That's Nkoda.com. It has a great score of Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony and all the orchestral parts too, so you can follow along with this podcast or with a recording. So check it out at Encoda. Anyway, let's look at the music. The first movement is in a kind of sonata form, and if you want to learn more about musical forms, you can visit my playlist, How to Listen to Classical Music, on my YouTube channel, Inside the Score. So the piece opens with a slow introduction, these ghost-like chords on basses and bassoon, and this foreshadowing of the main theme. very somber, very gloomy, and bleak. And then the allegro comes in B minor, the key of the symphony, and this is the first subject, clearly based on that bassoon theme from the beginning. It starts with violas and then a response from the flutes, and it soon reaches a climax. And then there are a number of lively transition themes that follow in a long, crescendoing dialogue. Here are a few. It reaches a climax. And then, in dying away, it makes room for the dawn of something very beautiful, the second subject. And do go and listen to this whole symphony. It's one of Tchaikovsky's great, great pieces. This stunning second subject is followed by a beautiful dialogue between the woodwinds. And then the second subject comes back, fully orchestrated. Following this, there are a few strains of the second subject dying away. Finally, it dies off like this. Did that wake you up? That's how Tchaikovsky begins the development, dying away from the second subject and then, with a sudden crash, bringing us into the heat of things. It starts with agitated figures on the first theme, into a kind of stormy fugato. And this leads to a great outburst on trumpets and trombones. It's actually musically very easy to follow, which is part of its genius. At one point, it simmers down, and we hear this quietly intense statement of the first theme. And it builds up and up in a kind of slow crescendo of intensity. To a full statement. And then dialogue between strings and winds. And then one of Tchaikovsky's most extraordinary build-ups. And from this emerges this amazing tragic climax, a last word in Tchaikovsky's final piece of music. The tragedy or the pathos of this symphony is fully revealed and laid bare. From this, we get a recapitulation of sorts, Only there's no first subject, just this second subject, now a little different with these rising scales accompanying it. But that flows into a natural climax. And the coda of this movement is very simple. Just this cadential figure in brass over a pizzicato descending scale. And that crowns this movement with a simple grandeur of beauty and pathos. The second movement is a kind of scherzo trio form. It's an extraordinary creation. He's put it in a 5/4 time signature, an irregular time signature, and yet he's managed to make it sound so regular, as if it could be a kind of dance. Each bar alternates in rhythmic groupings between 2+3 and 3+2. Have a listen to how graceful this 5/4 dance is. The trio takes on a more sorrowful tone, with constantly repeated notes in the timpani to ground it. And the coda is charming and simple, with a descending scale in the upper parts and a rising scale in the lower parts. Ending on a dialogue of music from the trio's themes. The third movement begins with this quiet, busy idea, this triplet motion which lasts almost incessantly until the end, when it becomes a march. And there's this second subject tune, which we need to be aware of. There is no development. The first subject returns without any kind of process. But then there is a development which becomes hugely dramatic, another of Tchaikovsky's great crescendo build-ups. And after a whirlwind of scales, we get the theme, now as a huge march for full orchestra. And from here on out, it really is a non-stop thrill ride, right to the end. A joy and a thrill to listen to. But then, as if to put a cap on our joy, we are interrupted with the tragic chords of the slow finale. And what's fascinating about this is if you look at the score of this movement, you can find one on encoder, as I say, there's a brilliant orchestral device going on. Every single note in this melody is alternated between the first violins and the second violins. So the first note is played on first violins, the second note on second violins, the third note on first violins, and so on. And what's more, in Tchaikovsky's time, it's likely that the first and second violins were split on either side of the conductor. So the first will be on the left of the conductor and the seconds will be on the right of the conductor, meaning you get this ping-pong effect between the left and right side of the stage, sharing this melody. Have a look at the score to see what I mean. But anyway, this theme is the desperate first subject of our finale. And there's this second subject, this kind of consolation. This second subject is worked up to a great climax. Which leads, after some dramatic pauses, but without development, to the recapitulation. In the recapitulation, the first subject reaches an even greater climax. Which then dies down until a subtle, ominous gong stroke brings back the second subject, now in the tonic minor key, changed from consolation to despair. And so the symphony dies away in darkness instead of reconciliation, a subversion of the old Beethovenian model of darkness into light. Tchaikovsky chooses darkness into despair. So here are my favorite recordings of this, and there are a few. For a beautifully balanced and expressive recording, you could try Andris Nelson's with the Birmingham Symphony Orchestra. For a thrilling classic with Russian musicians, with breakneck tempos in the third movement, you could try Mikhail Pletnev with the Russian National Orchestra. Or for one that really wears its heart on its sleeve so that you can feel the expression bleeding out of the music, you could try Herbert von Karajan's recording with the Berlin Philharmonic. I think he actually recorded this 5 times, but the one that I truly love is the 1972 set. The album cover is a dead tree with the word Tchaikovsky over the cover in pink, and it's published by Warner Classics. There's incredible expressivity in that recording, and so I think that's my all-time favorite. Again, thank you for listening, and as always, you can support my work on Patreon by visiting patreon.com/inside the score. I regularly put exclusive material up there on classical music, discussions on specific pieces, walkthroughs on the piano with me talking to videos, Q&As, tutorials, and so on. So do check out my Patreon at patreon.com/inside the score. And again, if you want access to that huge bank of great quality scores, you can visit encoder.com. That's nkoda.com. Do share this podcast with your friends if you want to introduce them to this piece or others, and I'll see you soon.